Welcome to Historically Speaking. I'm your host, Michael Dwyer, and we are Around the World in 80 Countries, Part 2. This is a reminiscence of pages from my stamp collection, which stopped when I was in high school. And as I've had the opportunity to think about this 5 decades later, two things stand out. One is represented here in this album. It's a very different compilation of the world because the nucleus of the collections came from my parents during their World War II years that was still when major parts of the world were part of colonial empires, chief of which was the British Empire, on which the sun never set, the French colonies in Africa, the Dutch in the East Indies. So as I was collecting, it was the end of that last stage of colonialism, but I never quite caught up to all the different and new countries. So it's a very interesting way in which we looked at world history and its organization. And the other thing that I've thought a lot about in terms of collecting is the kindness of so many people who would buy stamps for me on overseas trips. And this is an excellent place for me to begin as we go today from Korea to Yemen. I have a page here of new stamps then in 1975 from Korea. I made my own page in the album. My closest friend in high school's dad was in the Merchant Marine, and he went to the post office for me and bought a handful of stamps. I can't tell you what they represent. I would recognize the distinctly Korean characters, but as you can see on the stamp somewhere, it says Republic of Korea on them. Lebanon. On the right, we have early Republic of Lebanon stamps that would be reflective of the era of Lebanon when it was a mandate of the French Empire after World War I. You see on the right the famous cedar of Lebanon, and then on the left I have more up-to-date pictures from the Republic of Lebanon from the 1960s. Liberia. Liberia was an African country that was originally founded as an outpost for expatriated former American slaves, and I think it's very interesting here that we would have triangular airmail stamps from Liberia circa 1937. Luxembourg, one of the few remaining grand duchies in the world. We have two versions of the reigning Grand Duchess. This is young Grand Duchess Charlotte in the 1920s. Interestingly, she had taken over the throne from her sister Adelaide, who looked a lot like her. Adelaide resigned in 1919. She was suspected of being pro-German during World War I, and she was ill. After her abdication, she died a few years later. And then over time, in the 1950s, Grand Duchess Charlotte updated her image, which you can see on the lower right-hand corner, the purple stamp with Grand Duchess Charlotte in profile. She abdicated in favor of her son Jean in 1964, and she lived to the ripe old age of 89. Madagascar. Madagascar, which was a French colony in Africa. In the stamps that are in the middle, you can see the three in the center of the page that were issued during the era of Free France that we talked about in the previous program. And the man who is depicted in the upper right hand corner is a Sakalava chief, and the woman below is a Hova woman, some of the indigenous people of Madagascar. Mauritania. Now, why would we have, in another French African colony, why would we have a man on a camel? And the reason for that is this is how the mail was delivered before railroads and highways traversed the country. Mexico, variety of colorful stamps from Mexico. One of the ones that I find most interesting is, and it's actually just the illustration, you notice in the upper right-hand corner, the illustration for the centennial of the postage stamp. We spoke about the penny black being issued in 1840, and here we have a place for Mexico commemorating the centenary of the first postage stamp. Monaco. I have to admit that Monaco is one of the most colorful stamp-producing countries that I collected, and I would like to comment on just a couple of these. The woman in blue that you see towards the upper left, and then again to the right, that is Saint Bernadette, Bernadette Soubirous, and what is being commemorated here is the 100th anniversary of the apparition of the Blessed Mother to Bernadette at Lourdes. And you can see in the triangular stamp in the middle of the page, Pope Pius the 12th, who was the Pope at the time of the centennial, and then on the right is Pope Pius the 9th, who recognized the validity of this apparition, and it's a worldwide heritage tourist site. There is a memorial stamp that you can see here on the left, a nice triangular square tilted stamp to FDR, who died in 1945, but the stamp was issued in 1956, probably because that was the year that Grace Kelly married Prince Rainier. And in the lower left-hand corner, we have the Charles Wilson Peale painting of George Washington after his victory at Princeton. And there he is, the great symbol of the American Revolution. And I find it very interesting that he is commemorated on a Monegasque stamp. Morocco. Morocco has images here of its King Hassan II, and you can certainly see the French influence on Morocco in the Olympic stamps that are shown in the top row. Mozambique. Mozambique was a Portuguese colony. The early stamps that you see in the upper left-hand corner show Ceres, the goddess of agriculture. And you can see at the top of the stamp it reads República Portuguesa and then Mozambique under. And this also reflects this theme of Ceres being depicted on stamps that were also popular in Portuguese stamps at that time. And you also have here some very, very pretty butterflies. The Netherlands. In the beginning of the Netherlands issuing of postage stamps, in my opinion, they were a little bit dull, as you can just see with the large print numerals. And we have images of, by the third row towards the right, of the young Queen Wilhelmina, the old Queen Wilhelmina. She resigned in 1948. Having spent much of her World War II years living in London, and she was succeeded by her daughter Juliana, whom you can see in profile and then face forward. And then in turn, Queen Juliana abdicated in favor of her daughter, Princess Beatrix. And it's going to be interesting when you see Beatrix come up on an Otherworld stamp very shortly. This is Nouvelle Caledonia, when it was a French possession. And the very interesting bird that you see here, I looked this up thanks to Scott's postage stamp catalog. This is called a cagou. New Zealand. New Zealand, when it was very much a part of the British Empire, you see images in the second row of young King George VI. We have the coronation image of Queen Elizabeth, who was the Queen Mother, and George V. And then in the fourth row, you have an image of Captain Cook, the English explorer, and then Adrian Tasman, after whom Tasmania was named, and he was an explorer from the Netherlands. And the bottom of the page, I love the two images, the green and the blue, of the young princesses Margaret and Elizabeth that was taken during the World War II years. Norway. Someone went to Norway and brought me some very nice stamps back. These are from 1973, and the one in the bottom right-hand corner reflects the beginning of the Nobel Prizes. Palestine, all the more interesting because of the news story, the news crisis that we hear about every day. And in these stamps from Palestine that were issued in the early 1920s, when Palestine was a mandate of the British Empire, we see at the center an outline of the Dome of the Rock and the Citadel. Pakistan and Bahawalpur. We have several images here of Amir Khan V. And I do know enough about Pakistan's history to know that many upheavals in government, and I am not sure if Pakistan still has any claim to an inherited monarchy. Peru. In the third row, we have, it's very hard to see here, but it's scenes of Peru's history when Francisco Pizarro conquered the Incas. And this is something that, I guess, from their viewpoint of history, becoming a Europeanized culture, that they would actually be glorifying the conquistadors. Persia, Iran. We have images of earlier rulers towards the beginning of the 20th century. We have the man on the far right in blue, who is Reza Shah, and then Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi at the bottom of the page, and he is the Shah who was the head of the state at the time of the Iranian Revolution in 1978, and that would be a very tumultuous chapter in our history when he sought refuge, he sought political asylum in the United States. The Philippines. The top of the page, we see the young infant king. He wasn't quite that small when the stamp was issued. Alfonso XIII, the last king of Spain. And as we move down, we can see the Philippines when they were a territory of the United States, given their independence after World War II. And in the lower right-hand corner, you see two young women looking like debutantes, and the woman whom you see at left with the blonde hair is none other than Princess Beatrix of the Netherlands, who made a visit to the Philippines. And the woman next to her, I don't know much about her except her name, Evangelina Macapabal. These Polish stamps have a lot of stamps from Poland, but I could not resist these stamps of pets. So you have a French bulldog on the upper right-hand corner. You have the image of the boxer, and certainly one of my favorite stamps as the owner of many Persian cats. We have a Persian cat. Portugal. Growing up in Fall River, Massachusetts, knew a lot of people who immigrated from the Azores, have lots and lots of stamps that came to me directly through correspondence with the Azores. The very interesting one to me is on the left-hand side, the man in 15th century costume is Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama is one of the people who, before Columbus, sailed trying to find the all-water route to India. He made it as far as the Cape of Good Hope, and I know his face well because there was a large statue of him that I saw every day on my way to middle school. Romania. Romania commemorates Olympic Games in the bottom, and in the top row, they commemorate some great artists, composers of the world. And the one that you see, the fourth one from the right, in the top row, is none other than Michelangelo with one of his statues in the background. It's probably one of his dying slaves from one of the many tombs that he sculpted. Russia, Soviet Union. Top of the page, we have various scenes from Russian history. I am particularly admiring in the second row the images of past Russian czars. So the image that is 3 rubles is Tsar Alexander III, who was the ruler of Russia from 1881 until his death in 1894, when he was succeeded by Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, who abdicated, and he and his family were murdered by the Bolsheviks in July of 1918. And at Nicholas's right, we have an image of Catherine the Great. And on the same page, we have stamps from the Soviet Union during the World War, during the 30s and World War II, and you could always identify stamps from the Soviet Union by the CCCP, which is Russian for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and you have honored in the left-hand column the great Russian author in his old age, in his youth, Count Leo Tolstoy, and at the bottom of the page we have the great Russian poet Pushkin. Saint-Pierre et Miquelon, French islands in the North Atlantic. These new-looking stamps were ones that my mother pasted in her album. I was able to safely, with a little bit of moisture, get them off the page. The ones that you see of the ship are those that were issued during World War II when France was occupied, and you can see here that it says France Libre. Thailand, sometimes labeled in albums as Cyan, and here we have images of the bespectacled King Phumphiphan Uldudet. Singapore and Malaya, when it was part of the British Empire, we can see at the top of the page, in the inset of the corner of the stamps, a young Queen Elizabeth II. These are from Somalia, when it was part of the French Empire, the Republic of France, and you can see the mosque at Djibouti. And then later, after Somalia's independence as a country from France, we can see commemoration of Olympic Games. South Africa. South Africa has a very tumultuous history in the 20th century, going back to the conclusion of the Boer War, where you had the Dutch and the British fighting for control of South Africa. The most interesting stamps that I find on this page are the lower left-hand corner, where you can see a church door in the year 1517 for the commemoration of the beginning of the Reformation, with Martin Luther attaching the 95 Theses to the door of the church at Wittenberg, and at right you can see Martin Luther. Curious that this country would choose to commemorate the beginning of the Protestant Reformation. Spain, during the years under Francisco Franco, who after winning the Spanish Civil War from 1936 to 1939, ruled Spain with an iron fist until his death in 1975. And these images, which just proliferated for years and years, they are a slightly idealized image of Franco. And as I read biographies of him, he didn't look quite like this. In the bottom row, we have 5 different shades of the same person. These were earlier stamps of the great Spanish painter Francisco Goya. Sudan. Sudan, once again, in its days as a French colony. It achieved independence, I think, around 1960. And one of the things that is depicted here at the top stamp are camel riders, once again, who would be the mail carriers. Sweden. I must say I was a little bit disappointed with this. Was the best that I could do from Sweden, not having a lot of variety in its early postal stamps. I'm sure they made up for it now. But you can see some of the monarchs at the time. At the top of the page, we have King Oscar II, and then below we have King Gustav V, who ruled Sweden for many years. As I mentioned previously, part of the fun of deciphering is that you would know that Sverige is Sweden. Speaking of deciphering, Helvetia is Switzerland. And in these images that we see at the top of the page, there are various historic buildings that are identified and commemorated. They celebrate real milestones in Swiss ecclesiastical and municipal history. And at the top, This may be, I'd have to look more carefully at this may be part of the legend of William Tell, which is a Swiss legend. Togo. Togo was another French colony, and we have 6 stamps here labeled of a scene called Le Cocotier, and these are scenes of a coconut grove, a valuable export. And then by the time that the Togo achieved its independence, you can see the Olympic stamp on the far right that says République de Togo. Tonga in Africa. These are what we would call novelty stamps. So you have the banana stamp, peel and stick, and then you have the heart stamp, which looks like you could send it as a Valentine, and this is Queen Salate of Togo. And undoubtedly, I got these through a mail catalog because they've never been used with the fresh adhesive on the back of them. Trinidad and Tobago, when it was a British possession, with images mostly of King George VI. These are images of Turkey, and the most prolific person on these stamps is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who is the father of modern Turkey after its recreation with the fall of the Ottoman Empire at the conclusion of World War I. The Republic of Upper Volta, which had been a French colony. And if you're wondering what this strange depiction is, this is a deer mask and a deer that you see. And then the hibiscus, it looks like an American hibiscus. Vatican City always produce beautiful stamps. Here we have an image of Jesus Christ from El Greco. We have Pope Pius IX, 2 images, 2 views of Michelangelo's Pietà, and then completing the row, Pope Paul VI. Venezuela. Early images of Venezuela with Simon Bolivar in the top row. And ending with Yemen, which is in the United Arab Emirates, and these are scenes commemorating Moorish art in Spain. Very colorful stamps. And just to talk about the kindness of people, my father would always say to his patients and to his colleagues, if you're going somewhere, send a postcard to my son. So this is particularly funny. This is from 1972. My name was never Francis Dwyer, Jr. It does not have our street address. It simply says corner of Prospect and Highland. Fall River, Mass., wrong zip code. Very different way that the mail would reach you no matter what. And Dr. Sullivan, one of my father's older contemporaries, wrote on this card, on the reverse is one of my cousins from Dr. Sullivan. And one more to share with you. And again, this was another one of my father's contemporaries. It's a scene from Greece, and it's addressed to me at the corner of Prospect and Highland Avenue. Now, it's not exactly a small town. Fall River was a city of 100,000 people, and yet the mail knew where to find me. And one more, I have no idea who this man is that sent me this lovely postcard of the Plaza Mayor, and he wrote, "Your father asked me to drop you a card from Spain for the stamps. I hope you don't have any like them. Have a great time, J. LaForest." And of course, I could not bear to cut the stamps off the postcard, and it's fun to have kept them all these years. So thank you for watching. This has been a wonderful trip back in time for me, and to once again, even though monetarily my stamp collection isn't worth significant money, it has priceless memories of knowledge and collecting.